This video is going to be covering defensive items for an AD carry. This is a very simple question of course, but it does depend on certain factors and depending upon the scenario it will change. Because of this I wanted to cover when to get a defensive item and of course which defensive item you should get depending upon the scenario. So let's begin with when to get a defensive item. After your second damage item. So I wanted to mention that the absolute earliest you can get a defensive item is after your second big item. So after you've got boots plus 2 big items. So after you've got, for example, your IE Infinity Edge and Rapid Fire Cannon. But never before that. Unfortunately, the AD carry rule is all about damage. You need to have at least 2 core damage items before you can even consider getting a defensive item. A note for this, for future points, boots do cover this without even saying it. So if I say 2 items, I mean after boots. Boots are automatically have to be bought. I'm talking about major big items. So try to avoid getting anything before your second defensive item. You have to get damage before you can do that. Even if you're getting killed in 1 second, you do have to get 2 defensive items before you can do anything else. You're dying extremely quickly. This means more than you're dying quickly. I mean, if you're getting popped every single fight, even with good positioning, I mean, they've got a really fed Zed who's jumping to the backline and melting you. They've got a really fed Ari who's just coming in and destroying you with 1 combo. And that's including not getting caught out. I'm talking in just normal fights, you positioned well, they just got to you and burst you because you're too squishy. This is the time to get a defensive item. Remember this one mantra for the AD carry role. You can't do damage if you're dead. So get a defensive item when you get to this point where you can easily die. This means as soon as you're dying quickly, after your second mid item, get a defensive item. Now, I know a lot of players don't like doing this. I understand you want to get more damage, you're the AD carry. But if you're dead, you're not doing anything at all. You're not helping the team in any real way. Yes, this means that IE Rapid Fire is a bit of damage, and then after this, you're going to get a Banshee's Veil, for example. Now, this means you will be lacking damage, but once again, no damage if you're dead. So survival comes over damage, in my opinion, because if you're not there, you're not doing anything. At any point in the game after your second item, when you're getting popped due to the sheer strength of the enemy, get a defensive item immediately. Don't keep rushing damage when you're just dying this fast. It's like having an unbelievably powerful sword without any armor over the body. Of course, this is kind of silly because you're not going to get the use of a sword if an arrow pierces that heart. You have no front line. If you have no frontline as your third item, I generally nearly always go for a defensive item. If you have no frontline, you more than likely have a lot of damage, ample damage as a matter of fact, but you're lacking defensive utility or just a tank overall. Because of this, you will need a defensive item because this generally means that no one's going to be defending for you. So after IE Rapid Fire, you can maybe get a Last Whisper, and after that third item, you should go a defensive item regardless. No matter what really happens, you kind of need to go for these things. So after your third item, go for a defensive item. When you've got no frontline, because there's no one defending for you, you just kind of have to go for a defensive item, and I always advise getting it after the third item. Even if I'm not getting killed, I like to do it as a contingency plan, because no one's really going to protect you. You can't just amass damage because you'll die before you can utilize it. So no frontline, after your third item, get a defensive. Last item. As your last item, always try and grab a defensive item. Without this, you'll just get wrecked. Now, I know it can be quite a draw to go just for full damage and just glass cannon people, but at the end of the day, the AD carry is the figurative sword of the team, which I've mentioned previously. So, the sword is very important and has to make sure that it's protected to a decent degree. If the sword is dropped at the start of any fight, the other warrior's probably going to win more than likely because you'll be without a weapon. The AD carry is the main damage buff for the team essentially. We've got the mid lane as well, which is maybe the health, but the main damage, the sustained damage, comes from an AD carry. So do try to get a defensive item as your last one. I know a lot of players that don't do this, and it's very silly. Even if you've got really good protection, you've got a really good front line, still get that defensive item. The risk of you getting killed late game is just too risky. As your last item, always get a defensive one as a just in case kind of clause. So that's it for when you should get a defensive item. So what defensive item should you get? Versus hard CC lockdown compositions, QSS or Mercurial Scimitar. This is one of the most common pickups by AD carries versus CC lockdown compositions. When they've got a lot of upfront lockdown, you will need QSS. So versus an Annie stun, a Thresh Q, Veigar stun, Nasus slow, Fiddle, Fear, Ash arrows, etc, etc. You should always get QSS into Mercurial later on, whenever you can. It is far the most effective pick you can grab. Now, one thing I do want to note is this item is quite risky. It doesn't give you as many defensive stats as some of the other items do. but overall it does basically, it's a get me out of jail free card. So if you can't get locked down, you can't be killed, and it allows you to kite a little bit more. Versus CC, just CC get this item. When CC's the threat, you getting locked down and chained, this is what you should grab. If you need hard defensive stats, this isn't your item. Don't get this versus Bruiser comps or straight up damage comps like Tryndamere or Master Yi, as it's going to be a little bit wasted. Now, the thing I wanted to mention, QSS does not work versus knockups. Knockups are not stopped by QSS. Vi's knockup, Wukong, Jarvan, Malphite, Alistair, anyone like that, this item is garbage, literal garbage. Don't get versus on-click CC basic knockups. Just don't get it versus knockups. This item does not work versus knockups. You're probably better with the Banshee's Veil. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that versus on-click CC lockdowns like Malzahar and Warwick, this is 100% a purchased item as well. So if CC is the threat, you getting locked down is the threat, and it's not just upfront burst damage, I do advise this item. This is a very common pickup versus CC pick comps. If they don't have upfront CC, do not get this item though. Versus general Bruiser compositions. Randuin's Omen. Randuin's is epic versus Bruiser comps. Olaf, Darius, Aatrox, Lee Sin, Shyvana, Xin Zhao, Shaco, Renekton's, Scions. It's all good. This provides us with armor, which limits a lot of the Bruiser damage, and on top of this we get raw HP, which even furthermore makes us a lot tanky. From here, we also get ourselves a basic lower attack speed whenever we attack. So Randuin's, whenever the target attacks you, lowers the attack speed of the person hitting you. Additionally, you've also got the active, which is going to be a slow for self-peel versus the Bruisers as well, which is even further more effective. Versus really big Bruiser comps that, generally speaking, are just going to be on you, it can be really smart to grab this. Versus Kitable Bruiser compositions. Frozen Mallet. This item is actually quite rarely mentioned, which is a shame. I find it to be a good defensive, offensive item. It gives you great HP, and the active allows you to kite far more easily. This is a good defensive item and offensive item. Honestly, I can't recommend this enough, especially if you're a good kiter. If you've got the opportunity and they aren't immediately getting on you and you're versus a Bruiser comp. So Randuin's is when you're basically getting beaten up quite heavily and they're always on you. Whenever you're versus anyone you can possibly kite, like a Darius for example, Frozen Mallet can be a really good item to basically lock them down and kite them out a lot more effectively. With protected compositions, Frozen Mallet. Once again, this item is disgusting when with a good comp. If you're protected, you already have enough protection and you should be surviving for the most part because of this. Yet, you want a defensive item, but you don't want to go too defensive because you still want damage. Frozen Mallet is your pick. If you're defended appropriately and you don't want to go a defensive item too much and you can get away with not even going a defensive item, a middle ground in this is Frozen Mallet. Since you're already protected enough, you don't need super hard defensive stats. So why not go for some offensive defensive stats and get a little bit of AD and a bit of HP and some utility lockdown. And on top of this, the ability to kite and lockdown overall is just really invaluable, especially it'll even help you protecting yourself with protected comps, which even furthermore makes you harder to get to. Bring a little utility in for your team. I love this item when you're safe enough to get it. I actually get this item whenever I'm not playing Ezreal or Ashe, if I can get away with it at any point. This is a beautiful item. Versus AP compositions and pick compositions. Banshee's Veil. Versus AP comps and pick compositions and champions such as Blitzcrank, I love the Banshee's Veil. The MR and HP give me tanky stats versus the literal damage of a caster composition, which gets me pretty beefy so I don't get bursted down immediately. If the damage is the main concern and not necessarily the CC, I feel that Banshee's Veil is far better than QSS. And that's A. B is to ensure I also can't get picked. When versus champions like Blitzcrank, Ares Charms, all these fun little abilities, it can be quite important to get yourself a Banshee's Veil. It gets you I can get picked off once kind of feel, or it'll stop the original caster. So versus AP comps like a Veigar for example, he'll come in with his E at the start, and that'll basically proc off the Banshee's Veil, or he might start with his Q and the Banshee's Veil will block the damage. Basically it can just help you out really heavily in stopping that first original drop of damage, or the first original CC, which is more common. Dive compositions. Banshee's Veil. Versus dive comps, Banshee's is one of the best items you can go for. Now I'm going to reason this out. HP, MR, a little bit of durability in terms of hard stats. Its passive also lets you get away with the first dive. So in dive comps, their job is to get to immediately the back line. Immediately get there 100% in one go. Now, because dive comps do so much damage, I find QSS is a little bit wasted. Because whenever they dive you, for example, if I comes in and knocks you up, that can't be QSS'd anyway. Then Hackram comes in and melts you. QSS doesn't give enough defensive stats to really survive the damage, and also it's really situational to CC. Usually divers do damage, which is the main problem. So overall, Banshee's Veil can work out by giving you the hard stats, and it will stop the first CC. Now, normally divers chain CC, so Hecarim and Devi into whomever, essentially. If you've got Banshees, you can stop the first dive, so Hecarim ultimates on you, or Vi ultimates on you. It stops the knock-up, it stops the fear, and then the follow-up is just so much more difficult to land. And even if they do land it, the HP and durability stats are generally a lot more effective. Assuming you're playing safe, if you're sitting on the backline, Banshee's Veil is really, really powerful versus dive compositions. Now, this is situational. If they're CC dive comps, QSS is better. If they're straight up just hard dive comps in terms of just lots of divers and damage, and it's really just lockdown damage, Banshee's Veil is probably a better pick. Really depends upon the scenario though. AP and AD damage, Warmogs. If versus an AD AP composition, the best thing you can go for is actually Warmogs, if CC isn't an issue. Warmogs gives us a mass amount of HP, which helps versus physical burst and magical damage. It's actually one of the best overall raw defensive items in the game, because you're going to have a lot of HP from it, which as an AD carry, you do have quite low HP. HP is a more valuable stat early game than armor, depending upon when you get it. When you're not versus heavy CC, this is actually a nice item. When it's versus a large quantity of like general true damage versus AP, AD, it works versus everything. Health is universal, so if you're not versus too much catch CC, you're versus a mixture of damage, but Warmogs can be a really nice pickup. Don't get GA. Guardian Angel is a great item. It gets you a revive, it gets you a little bit of MR, some armor as well, and it gets you a little bit more durable, and you get a HP when you come back, but I find it rarely functions well in a solo queue environment. When you get dropped by an enemy team, you'll rarely be able to be saved by your own team after you resurrect. I find that I die immediately without too much help, especially in the current really bursty meta. I find that going for this, even if you come up, they'll just burst you down immediately after. It's kind of a little bit of a waste. I think you should go for a better defensive item. GA is more, I'm going to get dropped but my team can save me. It's not a hard solo queue defensive item. This item requires your team to CC, peel and use lockdown when you come up, which generally isn't guaranteed in solo queue. Additionally, the defensive stats aren't the best compared to a lot of the other pickups. The armor and MR is nice, but a Random's Omen, for example, gives you far more raw defensive stats. Not getting popped down in the first place, in my opinion, right now is a little bit more important than coming back to life. So here's a list of all of the defensive items I just mentioned. You can screenshot it if you would like, and a basic explanation beside them, so I hope that helps. Lastly, before I go, I just want to thank this guy, I cannot pronounce his name, for giving me the idea on my stream. I really, really appreciate it, and that's it also for the video, guys. If you like it, dislike it, dislike it. If you like the content, you can subscribe, and you think it's absolutely horrible and completely incorrect about a couple of these things, or the quality is just really poor, you can unsub. I'm really, really fair. If not, guys, I also stream on Twitch TV, a link will be in the low bar. I make educational, and of course, we have a little bit of fun content as well. Beyond that, guys, have a great day, best of luck in the Rift, and I'll see you guys next time.